search in Google AWS free tier, and here we can select this first search result. So if we do this, we have here the option to create a free account. And if we scroll down and see here these products that we have available, we see that we have Amazon S3, which stands for Simple Storage Service. And we have here 12 months of free storage and also a standard storage of 5 gigabytes available. So now we will sign up. So when you are opening an AWS free tier account, you still have to provide credit card details, and then also AWS will check that by withdrawing a small amount of just $1 around and then also reversing that. So this is totally fine and you will get this money back, so you don't have to pay anything. So here you can just provide the email address, set up a password and also an AWS account name. And after we have provided the credit card details, we need to also confirm our identity. We can do this, for example, using a text message. So after I have now provided a phone number, I get a code, and this code I can enter in here to verify my identity. And in here we can now also select a support plan. Of course, we will go here with the basic support, so with the free option. And afterwards, we can just complete our sign up. And this will lead us to this page where we have now successfully signed up for our account. So we can click here, go to our AWS Management Console. And in here, we can select the root user. We use our email address that we have used for the signing up. Then we just provide our password and we can sign in into our account. And then we have successfully created and signed in into our AWS account. So in this lecture, we are going to have a look at how we can create buckets in our AWS account. And then later on, we will use these buckets to copy data from it. So therefore, we will now just navigate to the page aws.amazon.com. And here we can then sign in to our console. In here, we can just select the root user, provide our email address, and then our password. After that, we just have to perform a security check, and then we have to provide the password. So when we are logged in into our account, we can just have a look here at all services. And in here, we find also the option S3. So this is what we want to navigate to. So we navigate to S3, and here we have an overview of our buckets. And this is where we will put the data in and then be able later to copy the data from. So this is basically our location where we can copy data from later on. So this is the step we want to do. We can just create a bucket in here or in here, and in here we can just provide a bucket name. So I will just use Snowflake S3 bucket 1, 2, 3. And then we have to select the region. And in here, we can leave it as this US East 1. So we select US East, North Virginia, US East 1. And this is important that we select here the same region that we have also selected in our Snowflake account. So where we are hosting our Snowflake account on. Because if we have here the same region, this will save us the cost for data transfer. Because this data transfer is free if our Snowflake account is also in the same region than this bucket where it is hosted. Otherwise, we would have to pay additional data transfer costs. So therefore, we will also select here this region that we have selected in our Snowflake account. The rest we can just leave as it is and just click here on Create Bucket. So now we have here created this bucket and we can see here these details. So we can select this bucket in here and we can now also upload data and create folders. So we could directly upload these data files that we will be using, but for now we will first just create some folders. So for example, we can create a CSV folder, we can create another folder that is just called JSON. So for example, we have some JSON data, we can create this folder, and we can also create another folder that is, for example, different files. So this is something that we can do, just create these folders and also upload our data. But now we have to configure the connection to Snowflake and the policy so that Snowflake can access this bucket. And we will do this using roles. So how we are doing this, we will have a look at. So now before we create the policy, we first want to upload some data into our bucket and also in the folders that we have created. So we can do this just by navigating to the folder where we want to upload data in. So we will navigate to the CSV folder. And in here, we can click on upload and then upload data. You find this data also attached to this lecture, so you can also upload this data. So here, after we have clicked on upload, we can now here click on add files to add a file into this folder. Then just navigate to the path where you have these files saved. So in here we find this Netflix titles CSV file, and this is just a CSV, so a comma separated file, and we will ingest this in our Snowflake account and upload this in here into our bucket. And since this is a little bit difficult to see, here is an overview, so it just shows some titles and movies and series from Netflix with some additional information. So this is the file that we also want to upload. So therefore just navigate to the folder and then you can select also here this file. So we have selected that and the rest we can just leave as it is and then basically just click on upload. So it's pretty easy and simple. So now we have uploaded this first file into this destination in here. So later on, we will also need this destination. But for now, we are just uploading the data. So we can click here on close. And then again, we can navigate back using this navigation in here. So we can go back. And also, for example, we can upload some data here in this JSON folder. And in here, we can just upload, add files. And here also select this JSON file that you will also find attached in the lecture. So we will just again upload this file. Once this has been uploaded, we can then click on close. And then this is it. We have now also successfully uploaded data in this JSON folder. So if we want to create another bucket, which we can do, is we can just navigate back here to Amazon S3. And in here we can just create another bucket. So for example, we could just create another bucket. So I'm just giving this name. Just be aware that you of course have to choose a different name, but this is the name I will choose. And again, the region we leave as it is. Just choose the location that you have selected in your Snowflake account, because this will save us the data transfer cost, as we've already mentioned. And the rest we can just leave as it is. And again, click here on create bucket. So now we have created two buckets. So we have here this first bucket and this second bucket. And in this first bucket, we have basically already 3 folders. And in these folders, we have data. So now we have set things up in here in regards to our data. But now let's have a look at how we can create the policy and the connection here to our Snowflake account so that we can load the data from our buckets. Question is, how can we create the connection between Snowflake and our AWS account? Or to be more precise, here the buckets that we are using. So we will do this using the service IAM. So we can find this service here if we click on services in our AWS account. And here we can either scroll down. So in here we find this IAM, which stands for Identity and Access Management. So this we can find in here, or we can also just enter in here IAM and then just select here IAM. So this is a service where we can create users, create roles and policies, and everything that is related to the identity and access management. So in here, we will create a role, because this role will be then used to create the connection between Snowflake and our AWS account. So what are these roles? First of all, we want to answer quickly this question. So roles are a secure way to grant permissions between different entities. So for example, between our account and the Snowflake account. So this could be also an example of an entity that we want to grant permission to. Like this, we can then use this bucket in Snowflake to load data from this bucket. So in here we have already two default roles created. In our case, we want to create a new role. And in here, we will select another AWS account. And in here, we have to paste the account ID. And how can we find this ID? We can just navigate here to account Snowflake trial. And then in here, we find my security credentials. So I'm just going to select this. And then in here we find our security credentials, and also in here we find our AWS account ID. So we are just going to copy this and paste it in here. So then we have to select both of these options because we require an external ID. This is here what is also written, best practice when a third party will assume this role. So this is later on where we will paste the ID from Snowflake. So we have to use this ID later on. For now, we just write a dummy value of, let's say, 5 times 0. And then we can just click here on next to grant the permissions. So in here, we have to now select the permissions for this role. So in here, we want to search for S3. And in here we find S3 full access. So this is what we select in here. And then we can click on next. Text we don't need. And then we can just review and also give a name. So in here we can just provide a descriptive role name. So we can write here, for example, Snowflake access role. And in here we can also give a little description. So this is a role used to grant access for Snowflake. So just a description, and then we can, if we are happy with the role name and the description, we can create this role. So now we have here this additional role available. And now we can select this role to see the summary of this role. And also we have here this trust relationships. If we navigate to this ribbon, we find now here these zeros that we have provided before. And also we have here the trusted entity, which is our account name. And in the next lecture, we will have to change this in order to make the connection to our Snowflake account or from our Snowflake account to our AWS bucket. But this we will do later on in the next lecture. So for now, note that we can click here on Edit Trust Relationship. And in here, we find this JSON file and we can adjust this to update this policy. And we find again here these zeros, and also we find here this AWS value. So this is something we have to update. But now we have created this role, and for now we can click on cancel. We can leave this window here open, and in the next lecture we will now go into Snowflake and create the connection from Snowflake, and then with this connection we will update this trust policy. So establish a secure connection from our Snowflake account, so using this so-called storage integration object to our AWS account. So like this we can access the buckets and we can load from there in a secure way. So this is the actual secure way of how we should do this, using this so-called storage integration object. This is an object that basically is establishing the trust between our bucket, so we use the role in our AWS account that we can assume using the storage integration, and then we have to establish the trust like this using the storage integration. And this storage integration, that is just an object like also a stage object, can then be basically attached to our existing stage so that we can establish this connection to this stage. So how this works, of course, we will see in the next lecture, how we can attach it to our stage and then use it in our copy command to load the data from there. But here we first want to understand how we can now create the storage integration object and how we can set this up properly. So step number one is, of course, we just create this object. So how does this work? We have to specify the type as external stage, and then also the storage provider, in this case, of course, will be S3. So we want to load from an S3 bucket in AWS. And then accordingly, when we have set those two properties or those three will change here. So we have AWS role ARN. So of course, depending on the cloud provider that we are using, we will have different properties here. With Azure, it looks a bit different, and we also have a look at this at another section in this course. And now we can then, once we have set up this storage integration with this name, this is just the name that we give to this object, we have to also pass in the storage AWS role ARN. So this will be the role that will be assumed, the role that we have set up in our AWS account, and then also the allowed locations. So here we can pass in one or multiple locations. So therefore, as step number one, I will just navigate to my bucket. Here we have set up this folder structure, and of course the name in your case might be different. This is of course not an issue at all. And I will just, after here these two forward slashes, paste in the bucket name. And of course I can now limit this further. Either I can give access to the entire bucket, or I say this should be only to this specific path, so to this specific folder CSV, for example. And I can do the same thing as well in here, but in this case I can, for example, use it for the JSON folder. So I can just say this should be here JSON, and then I also have to paste in here the AWS role ARN. So for this I have to go back to my account and I have to navigate to IAM. And in here, we have to now look at the role that we have created before. So I can here just search for Snowflake. And then in here, we will see if we select this and we navigate to trust relationship. And in here, if we have a look at this ARN, we can also just go ahead and copy this. So this is the ARN, so basically an identifier of this role. So like this, we can tell this storage integration object that this is the role that we assume, and this is the role that we want to have here. Of course, we have to also grant access to this and accept this and trust this storage integration object, so Snowflake, from our AWS side, because it's not enough to just provide it here, but we have to also trust it from the AWS side. So how we do this? So step number one, we first of all just create this object on our Snowflake side. It works, it has been created, very nice. Of course, just make sure that you are using the account admin. This is the easiest way for us to set this up. You could also use otherwise the security admin. And then now we want to, of course, trust this object. So we want to trust from AWS also that we are allowing to assume this role, because not everyone can just assume this role. We have to explicitly accept this or grant this permission, this privilege, that this role can be assumed from our storage integration object. So to do this, I will just describe this object, and then in here we will have a look at some of these properties. And here we see that we have this role ARN, we have the user ARN, and also the external ID. So this is what we have to now use. In this case, I have to select the IAM user ID, and in here I can now just copy this value. So this is what I will have to paste in to the trust relationships. So when I have this role selected in my account, and again, you can just go here to roles under AIM, and then you can just search for this role. You can open it, and then you can go to trust relationship. And in here, we have to edit this trust relationship so that we can now paste in this here, so this user ID, so that we know that this is what will be assumed here. So this is the user ID basically. And then we also have to provide the external ID. So this is what we can find also in here. So this is just how it works. We have here this external ID, and this is basically the account in some way. And we can copy this like this as well. And we also paste it in here. And then once we now update this policy, we should be able to see that this has been now changed. And also, yeah, now it should work. So let's go back to our storage integration. And in here, we have now set up everything so far. So now this should actually work. So we have now trusted this storage integration object, that this can now assume the role, and we can now use this storage integration object that assumes the role in our AWS account, and now we should be able to load the data. So how to see if this really works as we expected? So previously we have set up this storage integration object, and this has now established a trusted relationship to our role. So this role can be assumed, and like this we can access the buckets. But of course, now we want to still see if this actually works. So therefore, what we will be doing is we will of course set up now the table. So this will be just the table where we want to load the data into. Then we will create a file format object, and then of course a new stage object. And in this stage object, we will attach our storage integration object. So this will be attached here in the same way like we also attach a file format. And then we will just use the copy command using this stage to copy the data. So this is the theory of how this should work. And now let's dive into this step by step and see if this really works. So step number one, we create a table. Okay, we see this has worked. I hope that this was working because, of course, this is the easiest step, so this should not cause any issues at all. Step number two, we create the file format object. This will be used in our stage as well, so here we can just specify a couple of things, like the type of the file, the delimiter of the fields. Here we have a header in this field, so we can also have a look at the actual data. This is how it looks like. This is the file that we want to load. So we see we have here the header, so the header should be therefore skipped. Also, we can add a few additional properties, and this is why I will also describe this. And we have, just to understand a little bit more again about the file format object. So here we have null if, and we have, first of all, this is empty field as null. This means that when a field is completely empty, it will default to a database null, because this is different from just an empty value in a string. So an empty string is different than a database null. And like this, we can directly say that this should be converted into a database null. And similarly, we can also convert null strings, so either in all caps or in lowercase letters. They should also be converted into database nulls. So like this, we can make sure that it is properly set up. And here, in case we have some nulls or some empty values, it would be, for example, like here we can see there's no value. So this is just empty, and therefore this would be just converted into a database null. So like this, we have now our file format object. And if we do this, we see this has been created. And now what we can do is we can set up our stage. So here I just call it, in the external stages schema, I just call it CSV folder as a name of the stage. And I can, of course, paste in here the bucket name and the stage. So as long as this storage integration object has access to this path, we can use this storage integration and load from there. Otherwise, it will cause an issue because the role has not sufficient privileges that is assumed by this storage integration object. So therefore, I will first of all just navigate back to our buckets. Here we have the bucket name. I will just copy this. So it was this bucket name, and in here I have to paste this now also into our stage object, and I can also of course limit this, or in our case we need to limit it because this storage integration object has only access to some subfolders. So here CSV, for example, I could add as a location of this URL in this stage, and also of course we attach the file format. And in the same way, we also attach the storage integration. So let's go ahead and create this. We shouldn't expect any issues in here. But now it is, of course, the question, will this copy command work? Do we maybe have to make some adjustments? Is the storage integration object working? Is our file format object working? So let's try this out first with this copy command. And we can see one error message, but this is actually a good error message because it shows us that we actually have access to our file, because we can see how many columns are in this file. So we already have access to this file, and we just see there are 26 columns, and in the corresponding table, in our table in here, there are only 12. So what is the issue? We have some fields here if we have a look at the data again. So for example, in here, we can see this is enclosed by these double quotes. And here we have just basically a text field where we have a couple of commas included, and this is just part of this field. And this is why this is actually enclosed in those double quotes. So basically, this is a text qualifier that is indicating that those commas should be ignored. This is all just one block of text that should be all in one column. So we should not use these commas inside those text qualifiers, double quotes, as actual commas. So here we should just ignore them and use this as one single text. So we can also tell this our file format object. So here we would use field optionally enclosed by. This is a parameter that we can use, a property, and we can use here this double quote as the character to qualify the text. So here we say the text is enclosed by these double quotes, and we can basically just replace this file format object. And if we do this, it will still actually use that because it is the same name. Even though it's a completely new object and it has just the same name, we can still use that in our copy command. So we just adjust it and we are still able to use it in our copy command because the name is still the same. So it just uses this name, and then hopefully now it works. So now let's try it again. We see it is now executing for more time, and it seems like the copying is happening. So we can see indeed it has worked. We have successfully loaded now the data from this bucket in a secure way. We can also, of course, confirm this by running the select statement. And in here, we can now see also that there is indeed some data. Everything looks fine. Here we have those values with the commas, also the countries. Sometimes there might be multiple countries as well. So this has now worked very well. And in this section, we have now seen how we can establish a secure connection using a storage integration object to load data in a secure way from AWS. Of course, in the other sections, we will also have a look at Azure and our CSV file and used this storage integration for that. Let's also handle our JSON file. You remember that we had in our bucket, if I just navigate to the S3 management console again, that we had here two folders. So we have already used the file here in this CSV folder, and we also have this JSON file in this JSON folder. So let's now also handle this file, which is actually a little bit more complicated in terms of the data itself, but we will also be able to handle that. So let's navigate back to our worksheet, and as we don't know the data, so therefore we just can also query the data, because let's assume we don't have any information about this data. But as we know, we can also query from this data. But before we can do this, we need to adjust our file format object as well as our stage object. So this is the first step. So we have here this file format object. We just create this file format object called JSON file format with the type JSON. And if we do this, let's quickly run this command. Just be sure also that you are within the account admin and that you have also selected this role so that we can create now this stage object with this integration object and this file format object. So that means that we just create a new stage with this path that leads to our JSON folder, and we can still use the same integration object. So in here, you can also use this file format that we have just created. So let's run this command as well to create our JSON folder stage. So this is what we have created in here. And now let's have a look with this stage that we have just created that contains our integration object, how our data looks like. Therefore, let's quickly run this command. This may take a little bit, but it's actually pretty quick. And we can now see at least the structure of our data. So this is again in the data type variant, which we can see. So we can just select one row. And in here we see now the objects in this JSON file. So we see we have an asyn, we have here something that is called helpful, which is an array. Then we have here the value overall, and we have the review text. Also, we have the review time, which looks actually a little bit difficult to handle, but of course we will find a solution to that as well. Then we have the reviewer ID, the reviewer name, summary, and also this time here as an int. So this is what we have in here. So let's now first create, as we know the objects, this as a select statement with the columns. So we know that we can use these objects in the JSON file as columns. Just by selecting here this column, which is the variant column, and then with a colon, we can just navigate to the object and use them as columns here in Snowflake. So therefore, let's also quickly run this command. I have just used all of the objects. So we have helpful, overall, and all of the objects in this JSON file. So let's run this command as well. And now it looks a little bit better, but still we can do a lot of formatting. So for example, in here we have these quotes. So this should be converted into a string. We can do this by this double colon and then the data type. In this case, it is string. Also, we can introduce an alias so that the name looks also a bit nicer. Then what else do we have? We have here this review time, which we will handle later on. Then we have also here this time as an integer, which we already know how we can handle this. So this we can just handle by converting this value review time into an integer and then use the date function on it. So this date function is converting the integer number into the real date format so that we can use it also easily in our database. So this is here this date function. Let's have a look at the result. And afterwards we handle this other date. So for now, this looks a lot nicer. We see that there are no quotes anymore. We have everything that looks pretty nice. But also note that we have here this review time. And this is not that great because this is just a string. And if we want to run date functions on it or use all of the benefits of a date format, we cannot use that. So therefore, we should also ideally find a solution to change here this custom format and convert it somehow also into a date. But we see it looks a bit difficult. So what are the steps we could do? Well, we could use the date from parts function. So we could just, for example, extract here these 4 value, so 2014, and paste it in here. So we could, for example, use the right and left function for that. So for example, for the year, we could use the right function. So first we convert it into a string, and then we use the 4 characters starting from the right. So this is the first one, second one, and these are the first 4 characters starting from the right. So here we would have then the year, which is what this date from parts function expects. Then also we can use the first 2 characters from the left side, which is here this left function, so that works as well. And in the middle, we just have to use the substring function. So like this, we can extract here this middle part, which is the day. So let's quickly run this command and see what happens. So we run this command and we see a little problem, because if we have extracted these 2 values here in the middle, it can happen that the day or the month is not really always ideally formatted, so that we don't always have 2 digits. Sometimes we have 10 or 06, but sometimes as the data is maybe not that clean, we can have also this situation that here is just a 6 and then this comma is extracted as well here from this substring, because we always here use 2 characters or extract 2 characters from the substring, and then sometimes this comma is fetched as well if there is only 1 character or 1 digit used for this day. And this is something we have to deal with as well. So therefore, let's introduce a case. So if here this value is already a comma, so we can use just this case here for this substring. So note I have again here this dates from parts. We have here the right and the left, which has worked fine. But then we have also here this case for this substring. So we have to make a case that is detecting whether here is a comma or not. And what is our case? So we just check here this condition that when this value in here that is extracted usually is a comma, then we use a different value. So then we just extract here this first value. And in all other cases, if this is not a comma, we can then introduce this normal substring that we had before, so that we extract both of the values, for example, for 10, 12, 21, and so on. So for all of the 2-digit values. So let's have a look at the result if we run this and if this is finally working. So now this looks a lot nicer. And now we also see that here this dates from parts has worked really well. And we get all of the results that we want to have in this date format. So this is now already pretty great. And this is something that in our case we are now happy with. So therefore, if we want to copy that data, we are now ready to create our destination table. So this will be our final table that we copy the data in. So therefore, we can just use the column names. We also know the data types that these columns should have, and therefore we are happy just to create this table like this. So once we have created this reviews table, we can now copy this data from our stage into our table that we have just created. And we use here this select statement in our copy command. So therefore, let's just run this command and then afterwards we will validate the results. So we see everything has been passed. We have no errors seen. So this already sounds pretty good. And therefore, let's just quickly also validate the results. And it looks really, really great. So hope this lecture that was a little bit longer could also showcase some of the challenges we can face